Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the joint virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. A virtual event co-organized by 14 main partner organizations and in collaboration with several other partners whose details are available on the event's website at scienceforbiodiversity.org. My name is Claudio Chiarolla. I'm the Program Management Officer responsible for technical and scientific cooperation at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is the first virtual session in a series of 5. Today's agenda will start with welcoming remarks from the distinguished representatives of the main co-organizers, followed by a plenary session entitled A Framework for Transition Towards the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. After the plenary, the forum's discussions will continue into 2 breakout groups, and further instructions on how to join such groups will be provided in due course. At the end of the breakout groups, we will reconvene for the closing plenary to hear from the co-chairs of such groups their main messages and conclusions. Without further ado, I'm extremely delighted to leave you in the capable hands of the co-chairs of this session. Ms. Britta Garfield, Senior Advisor for Global Strategy in the Smithsonian's Office of International Relations, and Mr. Sergio Aranguren, Professional Officer at the International Affairs, Policy and Cooperation Office of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute. Britta, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudio. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you for the opening of the joint virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. In light of the postponement of COP15, we decided to hold these events virtually in advance of the upcoming subsidiary meetings, Substa 24 and SBI 3, so the outputs can be submitted to these meetings. The program includes 5 sessions to be held today, as well as April 15, 19, 21, and 23. We're excited to welcome more than 50 distinguished experts who will speak about a collection of critical issues, including links between biodiversity, ecosystem services, climate change, livelihoods, and zoonotic diseases, transitioning to zero net habitat loss, biodiversity monitoring and data, renewable energy and sustainable use of biodiversity, ecological restoration, and the Sustainable Development Goals. These virtual sessions will help us identify priorities for science policy research and for increased technical and scientific cooperation, while also determining key knowledge gaps and needs for capacity building. The important role of science in policymaking has never been more clear than over this past year, and we hope that these discussions will be crucial for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the co-organizers for their tireless efforts, in particular our colleagues at the CBD Secretariat, and I will now briefly pass it over to the co-chair. Sergio, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Britta. Excellencies, distinguished organizers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to welcome all of you at the joint virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. Despite we have been working on the organization of this forum in an in-person format and taking into account the worldwide situation caused by COVID-19, the organizers decided to carry out a virtual segment in order to present some relevant inputs for the next meeting of the SOPSTA and the SBI, as previously mentioned by Britta. Now, we all know that it's totally necessary to reaffirm the need to take decisions based on the best available scientific and practical evidence. And in that sense, throughout these 5 sessions, We will try to answer the following questions. How feasible are the related proposed targets on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework? How to implement actions while reaching measurable impacts on biodiversity and global scales? How to build or increase global capacities for implementation, and how to build effective cooperation for scaling up? I really hope this forum will be productive to all of you, and the outputs will be relevant and useful to the parties of the CBD in light with the decisions they will take this year at the COP in China. Now, I will pass it over to Britta, as we will hear the opening remarks from the co-organizing partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Now I am honored to introduce our first speaker, Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. She has worked with the UN Environment Programme in leading positions for over 2 decades, including on law, ecosystem services, and corporate services. Among other roles, she served as the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Migratory Species. Before joining UNEP, she worked with Tanzania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. I would now like to invite Ms. Mrema to take the floor for her opening remarks.
His Excellency, Mr. Runqiu Chang, Minister of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual segment of the joint 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. The Secretariat is honored to collaborate with various partners in co-organizing these events. These events are intended to provide space for scientists, policymakers, and other relevant stakeholders to discuss and make recommendations on how science, technology, and innovation could contribute to the effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Such recommendations will bend the curve of biodiversity loss, obtain positive biodiversity outcomes, and foster transformative change towards achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I would like to also thank the co-organizers who have had to adapt to the new reality brought about by the ongoing COVID crisis. They have worked hard over the past few months to set up this series of virtual sessions. I would like to thank especially the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China, our COP15 host, for its active support, and the University of Tokyo, as well as the International Union of Biological Sciences for their financial contribution towards the organization of these virtual sessions. Dear participants, it is you, the scientific community, through your tireless work and engagement, that have kept ringing the alarm bells on the continuing loss of biodiversity all around the world. Your critical contribution to the key scientific reports, such as the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the CBD Global Biodiversity Outlook, and the most recent UNEP report entitled Making Peace with Nature, a Scientific Blueprint to Tackle Climate, Biodiversity, and Pollution, have all helped the world community and policymakers in particular to understand how critical it is to act and urgently change our relationship to nature. As we collectively work towards bringing biodiversity into the center of decision making, it is once again you, the scientific community, that we rely on to guide our thinking and action. It may be true that the amount of biodiversity-related data and information available to decision makers has significantly increased over the past few years. However, we are also very much aware that there are also major information gaps that still need to be filled if we are to achieve the transformative change needed to reverse biodiversity loss at a scale, while ensuring sustainable development for all. We need more experts to generate knowledge, to build global capacities, and engage in effective cooperation to ultimately show the way. Ladies and gentlemen, post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be adopted later this year will set a path towards achieving the ambitious 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. In order to take a transformative and evidence-based approach along that path, it will be more crucial than ever that governments and relevant stakeholders at all levels have access to and effectively utilize scientific knowledge. In addition, they need to undertake, examine, and address the impinging threats to biodiversity and to identify the key factors for success, for scaling up innovative solutions, for tackling enabling conditions, while reaching measurable impacts on biodiversity at global scales. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but we at the Secretariat stand ready to help you make your voices heard. I wish you a successful meeting, and I very much look forward to the outcomes of your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mrema. Now, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Runqiu Chang, Minister of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China. His Excellency Huang served as Vice President and Director of the State Key Laboratory of Geohazard Prevention and Geoenvironmental Protection, and also member of the Standing Committee of the Geoscience Society. In 2016, he was appointed as Vice Minister of Environmental Protection, and in 2018 as Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Excellency, the floor is yours.
尊敬的伊丽莎白·穆雷玛女士、女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家好！很荣幸代表生物多样性公约第15次缔约方大会 COP15 东道国和后任主席国以及中国生态环境部参加这次会议。生物多样性是人类赖以生存和发展的基础，关系着地球家园的未来。新冠肺炎疫情全球蔓延，引发国际社会对人与自然关系的深刻反思。人类与生物多样性之间的相互依存关系是如此的紧密，以至于生物多样性一旦被削弱，打击到的正是人类自己。我们必须从根本上重新思考人类与生物、自然生态系统及其生物多样性的关系。地球是全人类共同的家园，我们要秉持人类命运共同体的理念，守护好这颗蓝色的星球。中国国家主席习近平去年9月30日在联合国生物多样性峰会上呼吁，要站在对人类文明负责的高度，尊重自然、顺应自然、保护自然，探索人与自然和谐共生之路，促进经济发展与生态保护协调统一，共建繁荣、清洁、美丽的世界。当前，国际社会正在制定2020年后全球生物多样性框架，并计划在 COP15 上通过，为努力遏制或扭转全球生物多样性下降，实现2030年可持续发展议程和2050年人与自然和谐共生美好愿景作出贡献。受全球疫情影响， COP15 会期将延至今年10月，但我们很高兴地看到，科学论坛将提前开展研讨，为科学家、政策制定者和其他利益相关方搭建平台，共同探讨如何利用科学技术和创新推动框架的实施，并将有力地促进变革，以实现2050年愿景。线上会议成果 也将为推动框架谈判进程发挥积极的作用。我们期待在今年10月，各方相聚中国昆明，开展更加充分的讨论和磋商，相向而行，扩大共识，推动 COP15 达成具有里程碑意义的框架，为全球生物多样性治理注入新的动力。我预祝本次会议圆满成功，谢谢大家。
Thank you, Excellency. Now I am delighted to introduce Hesiquio Benitez, the chair of the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, SUBSTA. Mr. Benitez is General Director of International Cooperation and Implementation at Mexico's National Commission for the Knowledge and Use of Biodiversity, CONABIO, where he has been working since its foundation in 1992. Mr. Benitez, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. It is an honor to me to be at the opening session of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. A year ago, we were forced to start in a different way of living due to the COVID-19 pandemic and to work and deal with problems related to it. During this time, scientific knowledge has increasingly become a crucial tool to face this situation and to adapt to the new normal. Scientific information provides clear evidence of the strong linkages between nature and human health and the origin of the pandemic. After a year of lockdown of social and economic activities, we're facing more serious consequences for all societies, ranging from loss of millions of lives to major breakdowns in the economy of worldwide. This situation highlights the urgent need to conserve, restore, and sustainable use biodiversity for well-being, and the Convention on Biological Diversity is in the way to negotiate and to adopt for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will be the main reference for the next decade of activities worldwide in this regard. This last year has been very challenging as we've been constrained to work in virtual sessions while continually seeking for adaptive and innovative ways to further collaborate in order to achieve progress towards the new global biodiversity agenda. As SUBSTA chair, I am optimistic to see the proposed discussions with this Science Policy Forum on scientific and technical cooperation and information on the draft goals and targets for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the dialogues on several issues relevant to SUBSTA 24. I am convinced that the outcomes of this event will provide valuable inputs to advance on CBD process towards COP15 next October. It is important to join forces and that the scientific community works in a coordinated way to help decision makers to understand the dimensions of challenges we're facing and to take effective measures to reduce drivers of biodiversity loss and ensuring the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. It is also important that scientific findings be communicated in a simple and easy way to reach wider and diverse audiences in order to have a better informed and more proactive and responsible society. Finally, I do congratulate the organizers of this important event and looking forward to see the outcomes of the next 5 days. I wish you all success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Benitez. Now, Mr. Kazuhiko Takeuchi, President of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies and Project Professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives of the University of Tokyo, will present some opening remarks. Professor Takeuchi, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, honorable participants, it is my great pleasure to join my distinguished fellow speakers and welcome you to the virtual session of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science, or ICSS. This meeting was organized by the CBD, IUBS, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, UNEP, UNEP WCMC, UNEP IEMP, CSP CBD, ISC, GBIF, and IAI. I'm speaking on behalf of the ICSS co-organizers led by the University of Tokyo, the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and Stockholm Resilience Center. This is the first ICSS to be held in conjunction with the Science Forum and the first to focus primarily on biodiversity. We will discuss how biodiversity science can contribute to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, while taking notes of other sustainability challenges, such as climate change, mitigation and adaptation, as well as disaster risk reduction. So we are having these discussions not only in the context of the CBD, but also the SDGs and UNFCCC COP26. The outcome of this conference will contribute to the 24th meeting of the CBD's Substar at the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation in May and June this year. It will pave the way for a side event at CBD COP15 in October. The Sustainability Science Journal, of which I'm the editor-in-chief, will also publish a special feature on outcomes of our COP15 joint side event. Our collective work needs to be conducted in the broader context of sustainability, not in a biodiversity silo. Good science is the bedrock of a successful post-2020 framework and the key to achieving the SDGs for a healthy planet and healthy people. This meeting will enable us to take stock of the science in which we are engaged and to learn from and energize each other. I look forward to taking part, and I wish you all an active, productive, and above all, enjoyable experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi. I now have the pleasure to invite Professor Shashidhara to deliver his welcome address. Professor Shashidhara is the president of the International Union of Biological Sciences, IUBS. He holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge, and he specializes in genetics, molecular biology, and evolutionary biology. Professor Shashidhara, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, good evening, as the time may be in your location. On behalf of IUBS, the International Union of Biological Sciences, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 6th meeting of the Science for Biodiversity Forum, and this is being organized online. IUBS is a co-founder with CPD, this particular forum, what you call as Science for Biodiversity Forum, to discuss the science of biodiversity across the scales of size and complexity to help frame policies on biodiversity and conservation based on evolutionary biology and genetics, which are the core strengths of IUBS. IUBS, which turned 100 years in 2019, promotes open science and open data policy and guidelines in the domains of biodiversity, ecology, bionomenclature, health, agriculture, etc. As we are going through a painful period in the human history, time has come to recommit ourselves to conserve and expand biodiversity to keep zoonotic diseases at bay. Recently, IUBS has established a working group on zoonotic diseases, which will study the impact of climate change, deforestation, loss of biodiversity on the increased incidences of zoonotic diseases. In this context, the 6th meeting of the Science for Biodiversity Forum is expected to provide a roadmap for global discussion in biodiversity and conservation for integrated health of the planet Earth. I once again welcome you all to this important meeting and wish you all a very productive meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shashidhara. I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Scott Miller, Chief Scientist in the Office of Undersecretary for Science and Research at the Smithsonian Institution and Interim Director of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives and co-chair of the Consortium of Scientific Partners of the CBD. Dr. Miller, the floor is yours.
Excellencies and distinguished participants, I would like to extend a warm welcome on behalf of the Consortium of Scientific Partners, or the CSP, which the Smithsonian has been co-chairing since 2018. Back in 2006, my then Smithsonian colleagues, Christian Semper and the late Len Hirsch, helped found the CSP. So I am pleased that the CSP continues to be relevant to supporting the goals of the convention. The CSP is a network of leading technical and scientific institutions that aim to support parties in building scientific, technical, and policy skills in the area of biodiversity through education and training activities. The CSP is pleased to co-organize these virtual sessions with many esteemed partners to discuss, from a scientific perspective, how best to support the development and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and to ensure a strong scientific underpinning. CSP members, like the Smithsonian, are committed to promoting research, scientific discovery, and knowledge. We are committed to inform and facilitate better management of the Earth's resources by increasing our understanding of species and ecosystems, direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, and the impact of human activities on nature. We also engage with a broad mix of stakeholders to foster knowledge exchange and jointly determine how science can be translated into policy. CSP members look forward to contributing through our research capacity, collections, rigorous scientific data, and our ability to work across the natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities to craft innovative, evidence-based solutions for sustaining biodiversity. Let me also take advantage of this platform for some personal remarks. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has had vast impacts on our world. Many conservation areas and programs are facing large financial challenges, but the same financial challenges also face the scientific infrastructure that supports conservation. Museums, libraries, biodiversity collections, biological field stations, and universities all face financial shortfalls across the entire spectrum of countries. I am pleased to see the Roundtable on Biodiversity Monitoring and Data in this agenda, because COVID has also demonstrated the importance of sharing data. To wrap up, I would like to thank my fellow CSP members, in particular our co-chairs at the Humboldt Institute, for all of their efforts. And I would like to extend a thank you to the CBD Secretariat and all of our co-organizers for this event. We look forward to continuing our collaboration.
Thank you, Scott. Now I would like to hand it over to Dr. Oscar Gualdron, Deputy Director of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute in Colombia and also co-chair of the CSP. Dr. Gualdron is a system engineer and professional in physics, holding a master's degree and postdoc from the University of Laval. Dr. Gualdron, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to speak to you today as co-chair of the Consortium of Scientific Partners of the Convention on Biological Diversity, jointly with the Smithsonian Institution. It is very comforting to me that the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science are finally happening, in this case, in a virtual format due to the worldwide situation we are all facing since 2020. This is a virtual segment of the forum and the conference in order to keep the momentum and contribute significantly with strong scientific and technical inputs and recommendations to the upcoming process for the adoption and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in the 15th Conference of the Parties of the CBD, now scheduled for October in Kunming, China. This will be a space for scientists, policymakers, and other relevant stakeholders to discuss and make recommendations on how science, technology, and innovation could contribute to the finalization, adoption, and successful implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, seeking to halt and reverse the global decline of biodiversity, tackle climate change challenges, and foster transformative change toward achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature based on a strong scientific foundation and knowledge. Also, it will be very important to discuss and identify key knowledge gaps and priorities for science policy research, needs for capacity building, and opportunities for increased technical and scientific cooperation. We want to invite all of you to openly share experiences, knowledge, ideas, tools, and diverse perspectives on the various subjects presented in the agenda. The conclusions and recommendations of the virtual sessions will be presented to the parties of the CBD as part of the preparation process for the next meetings of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, the subsidiary body on implementation, an open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and of course, the conference of the parties. I wish you all a very successful forum, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gualdron, and many thanks to all distinguished speakers for these inspiring welcome remarks.